My name is Mary Sutton. I'm a member of the Fair Chance Project, and I just started a new project called Collective REMAKE with the sponsorship of Fair Chance Project. And I got the first grant from the Black Equity Initiative to run a series of cooperative education and development workshops through Collective REMAKE. I've been in the movement to stop prison and jail expansion in California for the last decade. California has built invested billions of dollars into prison and jail expansion over the last 30 years, and I've been in that battle statewide and in local coalitions to say, put the money into communities and invest in schools and education and youth centers and all the things that make our communities safer instead of building more prisons and jails. After so much doing that, I went back to school in the urban sustainability program at Antioch University, and as for my final project, I designed Collective REMAKE. So Collective REMAKE is a social enterprise that will support the development of worker-owned businesses with people that have been incarcerated or people impacted by incarceration, family members, and potentially people that are still inside. But right now, we're focusing on the reentry population. And Fair Chance Project is an organization that has multiple programs that are run by and for people coming home from prison and jail. So we have multiple members who, like I said earlier, have done 25, 30, 35 years in prison. They've come home to their own community in South LA, and they're all navigating reentry and all the problems and obstacles, housing and employment. So we're there to help support them, but also they're there to help support each other. So Collective REMAKE is designed, originally it goes back really to the Zapatistas. I went down and interviewed some folks down in Santa Ana who are developing some cooperatives there. And they're modeled around this community center down there, was modeled also after the Zapatistas, but I helped them draw up their model, and I kind of took it to incorporate for Collective REMAKE. So I'm in the very initial stages in startup for Collective REMAKE, so I'm looking for partners. I'm looking for serious partners to come in and be part of the startup team. But when it comes to fruition, Collective REMAKE will be an enterprise that has different networks of financial experts, legal experts, wellness experts, administrative and marketing experts that will all be represented in a central body with the mission of supporting developing a local economy, cooperatives with people that are in reentry. So this is the model. It's the Zapatistas, they had their outlying rural areas, and they had representatives from each of those areas come in, and they made decisions through a central body. And I think they're probably still operating that way in the area. So it's a great model. Oops. So why am I so passionate? Who am I? Why am I in this work? What concern is it of me, of mine? I've been an activist my whole life. I was politicized back in the late 70s, early 80s. I was kind of enlightened when I took my first women's studies class at the University of Minnesota Morris, and I picked up that mantle and ran with it, and I still consider myself a radical socialist feminist today, and that brought me into learning about Marxism and the economy, and read Selma James about sex, race, and class, and kind of started connecting the dots. And through my exploration of radical feminism, I met folks in an independent bookstore in the Twin Cities called Mayday Books, and we started the first Twin Cities Committee for the Liberation of Southern Africa. And for over 15 years, a group of us did work around the anti-apartheid movement, bringing in people from the ANC, the PAC from Zimbabwe, ZANU, ZAPU. We brought speakers that were on speaking tours throughout the United States. We raised money, we raised material aid, and we educated. We educated in the churches and the schools on a regular basis. So this is me way back in 1980. I also was an art student at the university, so I started integrating my art into the graphics for the movement, for all the different events we did. So this presentation kind of shows some of that. And this is some of my artwork around the feminist movement, you know, challenging the concept of the family and women as toys. This is a poster that has a quote from the women's movement in South Africa. Now you have touched a woman, you have struck a rock, you have dislodged a boulder, you will be crushed. That came out of a demonstration in, I think it was 1956, and the women in South Africa were protesting the mandatory having to carry a pass card. And so it was, that's a pretty famous protest. So I raised my children on my own. I have 2 girls. They're now 25 and 35, and now I'm a grandmother. I was able to raise my kids on my own because while I was a student, I went and got a union bus driving job. I drove the city bus in Minneapolis for 13 years. I wasn't expecting to be a career bus driver, but it was 1979. I got to top wage in 2 years. I got full benefits, so I went full time. I bought myself a house when I was at the age of 25, and you know, I was able to put a roof over my girls' heads on my own. And you know, I bring up this point because these are the kind of jobs that are gone. You know, even if you're a bus driver today, it's not the same job. You have to start part-time, you don't get your benefits, you might take you 7 or 8 years to get to top pay. So, you know, all these jobs have been negotiated and demeaned over the years, and it's happened in every industry, and it's happening now most recently in the post office. You can see it happening. It was kind of one of the last strongest unions as far as service industries. But anyway, so making the tie between the anti-apartheid movement and the anti-prison movement, you know, if you've read Michelle Alexander's new Jim Crow, she talks about the prison industrial complex as the new caste system. And, you know, this is not a new idea. She even admits it herself. People that were in the movements back in the 60s and 70s had been saying this for a long time. It's not new, but the Jim Crow law, the anti-apartheid laws in South Africa were actually modeled after the Jim Crow laws in the United States. And so this is a poster I did in the late 80s about divesting from the prison industrial complex. It actually uses images from the anti-apartheid literature and things to bring that forward. Yes?
When they start to privatize the prison system, it will be ways like this in US? Or at some point they switch? Now we have a private system for prisons too, in parallel to the public system.
Okay, I didn't hear the first part.
When the switch happen? Which year? When they start to have a
private prisons?
Yes.
There probably always have been some private prisons, but this is a myth that I'll set straight right away. You know, the majority of people are incarcerated in public prisons in this country. County jails, state prisons, and state federal prisons. So the private industry is there, but the private industry is an expansion of the public incarceration system. And yes, it's insidious, but I just want to make sure people don't think that it's all about the private prison system, because we are pumping billions and billions of dollars into expanding government jails and government prisons. They're selling bonds on Wall Street behind taxpayers' back, and we're going to be footing the bill. So I'll get into that a little bit. I can see my slides are backwards. So anyways, I came to Los Angeles in 2001 to support a friend of mine that was going to prison. Or she didn't know she was going to prison, she was going to trial. And she didn't go to trial because 9/11 happened. And she was deemed a domestic terrorist in the media. These are on charges from back in the early 70s. She had been living underground, they caught up with her. So she came to LA, and I came to LA as a friend. The National Lawyers Guild supported me to help build a support network for her. And then she did not go to trial because of 9/11. And she ended up doing 8 years in the Chowchilla Women's Prison, in one of the women's prisons up in Chowchilla. And at that time, it was one of the 2 largest women's prisons in the whole world. There were over 6,000 women incarcerated in these 2 prisons at that time. So 2007 was the peak of prison overcrowding in California. Between 1980 and 2007, the prison population just in the state system alone went from 20,000 to almost 180,000. And in that same time period, California built 22 state prisons and filled them double their capacity, every single one of them. And in that same time frame, they changed the laws, like Adrian was talking about earlier. You know, in 1977, it went from indeterminate to determinate sentencing. They put mandatory minimums in place. The war on drug was put in place across the country. The 3 strikes laws in California was implemented in 1994. All these things, while they're building and investing in this prison system, they changed the laws so indeed they could fill them up and broaden the net. And of course, we know the net is falling down upon poor people of color in every city in the country, really, every big urban area in the country. But Los Angeles has the largest jail system in the whole world. We have the largest probation department in the whole world. And over 30% of the folks in the California state prison system are from LA County. So I got involved when my friend was inside the women's prison, because I started learning the stories of why women were locked up. And we know that the majority of women who are locked up, 70 to 80%, are locked up due to poverty crimes, or they're a victim of domestic abuse and they've responded and perhaps killed somebody, or conspiracy and association charges. Their boyfriend, their son, their grandson even, you know, is dealing drugs out of their house, or they're in the car when, you know, somebody goes in and shoots somebody. So women are connected to people that do crimes. And this is happening to youth a lot also. So they filled the prisons through these kind of laws. And the stories of the women in that prison are just devastating. You know, their children are taken away. Most of them are abandoned. You know, when men go to prison, women take care of the men, but women in prison are very much abandoned. I went up there for 8 years to visit, and they had these visiting rooms where there were 30 tables in each room. Sometimes only one room was open, and you could see the same people getting the visits all the time. So, you know, there's thousands of women up there sitting in that prison that don't see their children and don't ever get the support and advocacy that they need. So anyway, I joined Critical Resistance, and you know, the view of the prison industrial complex their definition is that it's a term to describe the overlapping interests of government and industry and surveilling and policing. So, it goes beyond just the prisons. We have to look at the investment in the local police forces and all the many ways they're surveilling our communities. So we were down there at the Board of Supervisors for many years in a row, and I think the No More Jails Coalition is trying to get back together, but to fight the expansion of the LA County jail system. The LA County Board of Supervisors almost 2 years ago now voted to put multi-billions of dollars into the expansion of the jail system, moving the women up to Lancaster over 80 miles away. They're going to rehabilitate what used to be the Mira Loma Detention Center. We used to house ICE detainees there. And they're going to build 3,000 beds in the new jail downtown for people that are assessed with as being mentally ill. So they're agreeing that it's okay to lock up people with mental illness. And we know that a huge percent of the people in the local jail system are dealing with mental illness, and if not before, when they get out. And a couple weeks ago, I spoke downtown. What's the movie called about the bail?
That's the bail trap.
The bail trap talks about over 50% of the people in the LA County Jail are pre-trial. So that means a huge majority of them are innocent. But if you don't have the money to get out, you're going to sit there and languish there. And there's people languishing in jail for traffic tickets, jaywalking tickets, and kids getting citations. Their parents end up going to jail because their kids didn't go to school. They drag kids off the metro if they don't have their paid card. I mean, the metro in this town should be free for youth. I mean, just simply free. Anyway, so we both had campaigns to fight the prison and jail expansion, but I also worked on a campaign, the 50% campaign. The California prison system was filled double its capacity by that 2007, and there was a court order, the Plata-Coleman case. After 20 years, they finally won, and it was deemed that they had to reduce the prison population down to 137%. This was because the inadequate health and mental health care. There was one person dying inside the state prison system every week, and that's probably low. And then it was appealed by Jerry Brown, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the US Supreme Court upheld that California had to reduce the prison population. So they started doing that in many ways. Arnold Schwarzenegger was already working on it when he was in office. And what he did was pass AB 900 in 2007. It's the world's biggest prison and jail expansion project in the history of people. 53,000 new prison and jail beds at a cost of over $7 billion. And once that's paid off through the interests on lease revenue bonds, we're doubling and tripling that. There's ways to bring the overcrowding down. If you bring the capacity down, that doesn't mean release people. It doesn't mean changing the sentencing laws, or it could, but it doesn't have to. You can build more prisons, spread the people out, or you can send them to private prisons out of state. So indeed, in this AB 900 also, it was the first time the state was allowed to send people to private prisons out of state. So over 9,000 people were sent to prisons in Mississippi and Arizona and Arkansas. I think now there's still 4,000 people that are in the private prisons outside, state prisoners. And again, these, just like the firefighting scenario, the people that they're sending out of state are people that are nonviolent and of no threat to anyone. So that's why it's safe to send them away. And, and they lack programming, they lack contact with their attorneys, they lack contact with their family members. But these are the people that would benefit really well and be very resilient if they came home and were given jobs and a safe place to live and get reintegrated back in society. So these are the contradictions of these efforts. So when Jerry Brown came to office, his way of dealing with overcrowding was realignment. So what he did was take nonviolent, non-serious offenders, and instead of going to state prison, they'd do their time in county jail. So people that came home from state prison with those charges were under county probation instead of state parole, and people convicted of new such charges would do their time in county jail instead of state prison. So it lowered the overcrowding in the state prison system, but really what it did is just shift people to new lockup spaces. Yeah?
Sorry, what's the difference between state prison and county jails?
Yeah, that's it.
Idea, yeah.
Well, jails are normally used for, you know, it's like a holding tank until you go to trial, until you're found guilty. So people stay in jail until they've been faced with their charge and either been deemed guilty or not guilty. And only really low-level offenses would do their sentence in jail. So that's a big change with realignment, because jails aren't really built or set up for long-term housing, you know, or long-term programming. You know, people are moving all over, and it's just a crazy nut house. The LA County Jail is a hellhole. So, but this is where they're putting people. There's people doing up to 10 years in the county jail. And LA County has 18 to 19,000 people in the county jail system at any given time. And I think there's like 8 facilities, including the women's jail that and now they're going to shift all the women way up to Lancaster, like I said.
And can you also just define lease revenue bonds?
Yes. Okay. So this is I can share the paper I wrote too, because I did quite a bit of research, and I would like to even do more. And what's her name? Yeah, will it come to me? There's people that have written about it in the past, but in 1984, the public stopped voting. You know, they would always put the jail projects on the ballot, and the public stopped voting for it. And if they voted for it, it would be funded through general government bonds, which act quite the same way. But when in the 1980s, people stopped voting for them. They said, no, you know, we don't want this. People wanted schools and parks and libraries. So they devised this way to use lease revenue bonds. And lease revenue bonds are supposed to be for public projects that pay for themselves, like toll roads. You know, the money comes around and eventually the project is paid back through the use of that project. So they devised the scheme, and it's very, very complicated. But what they do is, okay, so the women's jail, right? This is AB 900 money from way back in 2007. The project's barely even started yet. They're gonna, LA County got $100 million through AB 900, and that money will come through the sale of lease revenue bonds. But in order to do that, they basically, the state loans the money to the county, the building goes back into the hands of the state, even though it's the county's property. And then once the project is completed, the bonds get sold to pay off the loan, and LA County will pay a lease to use its own space back to the state. So that's how they've devised. You know, it's kind of hard to get, but so these are unsecured bonds on Wall Street, sold to Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, all the likely characters, and the taxpayers don't even know about it. You can only see the lease payments on the back end of the budgets. So we're talking billions and billions of dollars upon the backs of California taxpayers to build it, and these are 30 to 40-year debts. So they're on the backs of our children to build jails and cages for our children, or for certainly other people's children. So it's really an insidious system, because this debt load is just coming from AB 900. The debt load is just starting to pile up now, because they finished the big Donovan, multiple projects down in San Diego at the Donovan project, the Stockton Hospital, that was one of the first projects, but all these multiple projects are getting completed right now. And since then, in 2014 and 15, through SB, well, see, I'm not doing my slides because this information is in there. All this stuff. So yeah, AB 1022 and SB 863 in 2014, they approved another millions of dollars for jail expansion. Because now with realignment, everybody has to fix up their local county jails. So all this is compounded expense for taxpayers. So we hear about some of the issues of reentry, and that there's money coming down the pike because of Prop 47 has reduced the prison population, and now Prop 57. But the thing is that money is all caught up in bureaucracy. It hasn't made it to the community yet. Realignment started in 2011, and there's just absolutely no investment has been made in LA County, because the people who do reentry services are competing for that money. They're in that realignment project that I had worked on so hard through school. I mean, I got burned. I mean, bridges burned, literally. Because of some of those agencies who were getting a little bit of that AB 109 money. Oh, that's what I haven't said. AB 109 money. LA County has gotten $1.3 billion, probably actually $2 billion by now, in realignment dollars, and this is to manage this population. And AB 109 is a law that it affects the whole state, and every county had the decisions to make what they were going to do with that money. It was not mandated that they have to put it in the community, but it was suggested they do. And counties like Alameda County and up in the Bay Area, they've had more success in investing in reentry solutions. But in LA County, 80% of those dollars has gone to the Sheriff's Department and the Probation Department. And a lot of the contracts now happening with reentry, they're colluding with the private prison industry. So GEO Inc. has over 25 reentry facilities across the state of California. So what's their motivation? To, have successful reentry programs. But that's, people want these, some of the right wing has agreed to kind of be easing up on incarceration. Well, they were, and now they're not. But in the Obama administration, we see people like Newt Gingrich and things. And when Trump got in office, the private prison stocks went way up. Well, so did these stocks for these public bonds and shares. They went way up also. And the private prison industry is getting all the contracts for the electronic bracelets and all this other kind of surveillance mechanisms that are broadening the incarceration network. So people might be out, like we were just talking about Amity Foundation downtown. That's a reentry home. And it's been kind of a good one, but because of the way the monies are directed, they've turned into a prison. And they are now housing people that are released early, but they're on electronic bracelets, and there's sheriffs on duty at the facility. And the people that were in reentry, they had done their time and they were out, got booted out of there. So, there's this broader expansion of the, who's under surveillance in the county. If you have questions, let me know, because I know I'm not going in order. So anyways, I've talked about these things. See, that's that grid line. I call this the austerity grid line. So this is the prison population, 20,000 in the late since 1950 to 1980, 180,000 by 2007. That's the same grid line that we see, you know, the fees in higher education going up at local universities, community colleges. It's the same grid line if you flip. The disinvestment of K through 12 education in the state of California. It's the same grid line that you'll see the disinvestment from social programs, and it's the same grid line of wealth being extracted up to the 1%. So it's not a coincidence that these things have all run parallel. So, you know, incarceration of people of color, Black community, it is an economic incentive for lots of people, but also it's part of social control. You know, the Black Panther Party was deemed the most dangerous organization, the biggest threat to national security back in the day. And since the mobilization of the Black Panthers and other radical entities in the 60s and 70s, they rolled out the war on drugs in Los Angeles. It's a fact that they pumped crack cocaine into the neighborhoods along with guns, brought them in on train cars and opened up the train cars. And this is, I don't know the name of that book either, but that's a proven fact that was uncovered. It was uncovered quite a while ago, but the records are now out that proves it was true. So this is the context for why now I've created this project to create worker cooperatives for people coming home from prison or jail, because people are coming to home to neighborhoods that have been completely disenfranchised. In South LA, African American population, it's already 50% unemployment or underemployment in these areas. So for people coming home from prison, options are really almost zero. Some folks get lucky and have advocacy and land some jobs, but opportunities, especially for older guys that have done so many years, they come home and people are suffering from post-traumatic syndrome. It's a tough route. So I started this project to work with that community. And I implemented the first series of workshops this summer, cooperative education workshops, a series of 12 workshops. I recruited 14 people from different reentry facilities, men and women. About 11 people stuck with it the whole way through. And there's a couple people that have business ideas for cooperative enterprises and I'm hoping to continue to raise funds to be able to support the people that have those plans through to fruition, and Collective REMAKE will be there for those folks. We can provide the administrative assistance and some of the bookkeeping assistance and things people need till they get off the ground. And then we want to keep duplicating the workshops. And I don't know if you saw the video, but Liz did a beautiful video. We had a culminating celebration event for the last workshop where everybody spoke and gave presentations. But I've talked to several of the folks who went through the workshops and said, even if they don't have a business idea, the exercise of talking about democracy and the idea of talking about equitable workspaces and autonomy and independence and ownership, it was transformational. It was for me as much as them, because I always learn so much, and I've learned to be patient, because you'd want to, we want a business, we need the business, and it's like it doesn't necessarily have to be about that right away. This is going to be a slow process to build the alternative economy that we're looking to build, but we have to go through the personal healing and the networking and community building to make it happen. So I'm a little more patient than when I started. I'm also, I'm back at school to get my PhD in leadership and change through Antioch also, so that I can kind of examine and practical implementation of real democracy inside businesses, and how you do that as a leader. How do you be democratic as a leader? I personally have suffered a lot of impact from founder syndrome in different nonprofit organizations, you know, small nonprofits that someone started up and they can't let go of the power, and the organization never grows. And my goal is to bring Collective REMAKE past a grassroots experiment and be able to create an institution that will survive beyond me. And maybe I can retire in 10 or 15 years. Something like that. So anyways. Oh, okay, so do we need, okay, should I do this part about different kinds of cooperatives, or does everybody know that? So, do you guys know about different? Okay, so Collective REMAKE is focused on worker cooperatives mostly, and you know, a cooperative can be any kind of business. The difference between it being a regular business, small business, and a cooperative is that it's owned and run by the people that work there. They make the decisions, they decide what happens to the surplus, whether it's going to go back to them, or it's going to expand the business, or if it's going to be used to help someone else start another business. But there's other kinds of cooperatives, and you might be familiar with food co-ops. Those are mostly consumer cooperatives. The people that patronize the store and purchase there, they're the owners. And there's a democratic process where they vote in a board, and the board then hires the management, who hires the workers. Rainbow Cooperative in San Francisco is a combination. They're a worker cooperative / member cooperative. Credit unions are a cooperative, a member consumer cooperative. Let's see. There's retail cooperatives. Yeah, look, my things are all backwards. Housing cooperatives. The Eco Village has a land trust, and that's a community housing cooperative. So not everybody there is owners, but they come in to function cooperatively to run the living space. They have gardens and communal meetings and meals, that kind of thing. Producer cooperatives. Organic Valley is a good example of a producer cooperative. They're in Wisconsin. And they work with multiple small farms who agree to do GMO-free organic product, so the certain quality and criteria for the product, and then they market the product as a whole to support those local farmers. Another example of the Organic Valley is doing so well now that they've gave a huge surplus into a loan bank in Minneapolis called Shared Capital. They do loans to cooperatives. So with their surplus, they put it into Shared Capital, so Shared Capital can fund small farms, and family farms. So that's an example of, you know, the principle of cooperatives supporting each other. So, and then there's retail cooperatives, Ace Hardware, True Value. They're actually structurally a cooperative. I'm not sure if they really adhere to the cooperative principles, but they use a common you know, logo and identity to do bulk buying and market their stores. And then we were talking about Mojoground earlier, but that's probably the largest cooperative in the world. Successful cooperative in the world with, I think, 80, how many businesses? 200 businesses, 80,000 workers. And you know, I think some of their successful business in the beginning were appliances, but they just have businesses in every realm. And I believe they're coming to the United States to help support some cooperatives. But I don't know how that's going. So anyways, I think I should, oh, no, I do want to talk about.
I don't want to pressure you, but I think if you can matter after 15 minutes just so we have some time for discussion, that'd be.
Yeah, okay, so no, I'm almost done. Okay. So Collective REMAKE wants to both adhere to the cooperative principles, but also to the principles of sustainability. So the principles, there's scientific and social principles of sustainability. So the scientific principles are that, you know, we are all dependent on the sun, as we are biota, right? People, we are the living part of the ecosystems that we lived in. There's chemical cycling systems that go on that are resilient and recreate themselves, that use the energy and for what we need. And then there's biodiversity. We are dependent on biodiversity. We have to have diversity. You know, when they start narrowing down the, you know, the kinds of flour and the kinds of potatoes and these GMOs, you know, that's going to make us sick. It already, you know, all the food allergies and all that. I mean, there's all kinds of grains and all that have completely been taken out of the food chain, and people are getting sick. It's funny because it's from a textbook. There's no people in their biodiversity, so I added the people. So the social science principles of sustainability are, if you're going to work on any project, whether it's a business, whether it's infrastructure, if it's going to be sustainable and to meet that definition, it has to be a win-win proposal. No, it can do no harm. If it's harming one community and making another community wealthy, it's not sustainable. We have to measure the full cost of any project. So when we send someone to prison, people think, oh, it's $50,000 a year. That's a lot right there. You know, that's a higher education, right? But the cost goes way beyond that. The costs of these bonds I'm talking about, but the costs to the families, the costs of taking away people's children, people lose their homes, investing in legal representation for their loved ones. And then when people come home from prison, there's no jobs. So you know, we have 2-point-some million people incarcerated, but we have another 3 million people that are on parole or probation. And then the residue of that, these people, none of them can get jobs, there's not work, and their families have been disenfranchised through the process. So the compounded impact and costs of incarceration, you know, are astronomical. Incarceration is not sustainable. And then the third principle of sustainability is that whatever the project is, it needs to be leaving something better for future generations. So those are the goals of sustainability that are pretty well accepted universally. And that's also the goal of the businesses that are created out of Collective REMAKE. So, and then, you know, the cooperative principles are open membership, democratic control, economic participation. Usually in a cooperative, everybody's investing the same amount of money into getting it started. I'm looking at investment through time banking, you know, especially with people who don't have money. You know, if you put 80 hours in as part of a startup team, you know, we'd like to see that count as towards your investment in the business. Concern for community and education. Education is, this is where I started, because when I came, I'd say, okay, we're going to start cooperative businesses. Well, people don't know what you're talking about. These concepts of democracy, people are skeptical, people are paranoid, you know, they don't trust you. So, and there's a book called Collective REMAKE. I mean, no, I'm sorry. There's a book called Collective Courage. Yes. By Jessica Gordon Nemhart. And it's a history of cooperatives in the African American community that go way back to post-slavery. And people like Harriet Tubman and Eugene Debs were all involved in, or W.E. Du Bois were involved in, you know, cooperative movements. And in that, W.E. Du Bois states he regrets that he didn't focus on the education piece more because cooperatives were failing. And it's that constant exercise of practicing democracy and understanding the principles is something that needs to be done throughout the history of any cooperative business. One of the best examples, Tim Hewitt is the one founder of the Arizmendi bakeries up in the Bay Area. I think they have 5 bakeries now and they're doing so well. They're putting some surplus right now into starting a construction cooperative. But they have an amazing process for orientating people into the cooperatives and making sure people understand the business side, conflict resolution, and all these pieces that it takes to run a business, but also how to do the communication and practice democracy inside the business. So I'll be looking to him as an advisor. There's other examples too, but I think he's an exceptional. You should have him. He'd come in on Skype. He's very generous with his time. So anyways, yeah, I need to get my script with the slides. But anyways, there are examples of cooperatives inside prisons too. That I'm going to be looking at closer, hopefully in this program. I want to go to Ethiopia. There's a women's prison. It's a project supported by the United Nations. And women are allowed to run the cooperative inside the prison and actually leave the prison and conduct business outside the prison and go back. They're able to handle their own money. Of course, this shows that these women could be rehabilitated on the outside because they're incarcerated in this prison in Ethiopia for the same reasons women are incarcerated in this country, because of poverty and abuse and these things. There's crimes of survival. And there's a cooperative in Puerto Rico, in a Puerto Rican prison. This young man started it when he was inside, and now he's helping people, formerly incarcerated folks, to build cooperatives on the outside. So there's a few places I hope to visit. And Italy, there's some examples of, I think Italy is involved in that Ethiopian prison somehow.
And there is also a cooperative called Mandy in jail that does t-shirts, right? Bags, t-shirts, stuff like this in prison, and then a bit set up outside.
Yeah, so if you know about that, I want to get that info from you. So anyways, okay. So I'm done. Thank you.
So yeah, if anyone has any questions for Mary, shoot away. I guess it can be about Collective REMAKE and more.
I was wondering, where does the initial capital come from to begin a cooperative, and who becomes the owner of the cooperative?
Well, okay, so the initial capital can come from the startup team, the worker owners themselves, but there are new funding entities, not new, but growing and more developing, like this Shared Capital in Minneapolis. They just changed their name because they're going to be supporting cooperatives around the country.
So they're going to be lending money to the cooperatives?
Yes, specifically to start cooperatives. And there's the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives is connected to some funding sources. You guys probably can name some of these too. The Royal Seco Time Bank gives out very small loans, so some of the folks who took my workshops are going to be applying for those loans. Like we're trying to get a recycling business off the ground, and we're going to probably apply to get a loan to buy a van from them. So there's multiple entities now in the United States that are looking to fund cooperatives specifically. If you have backup in capital or assets, you know, you can probably get small business loans, but people without money are going to have a harder time. And apparently, you know, for Nikki O'Cook is the African-American woman with the tire recycling business, and, you know, it's not as easy to get a small business loan in South LA.
So do they become like shareholders? You know, were they share in the profits? Or
No,
yeah.
no,
Like
no.
a corporation or?
Only the workers are the owners. They're the ones that have the shares. If someone loans you money, they do not have, I mean, they'll get paid back and there may be some interest on that loan, but their investment does not mean that they get a vote in how your business is run.
So the profit is basically divided among the workers.
Yeah,
And they
and in
decide, they
cooperatives,
decide what they're gonna do with the profits. And
yeah,
it's not like someone comes up with, you know, X amount of, you know, capital and he has that percentage of the ownership of.
yeah, absolutely. That's the biggest difference. I mean, that's one of the biggest differences.
And in California, that's actually by law. You can't, the profits made by a cooperative must stay within certain funds that are administrated exclusively by the cooperative, and then they get distributed into wages or reinvestment into the company, which is a cooperative.
So really, it sounds like upper management or owners are the ones who take the biggest hit because they're the ones who are making the biggest sacrifice, but yet what they make is kind of limited. And the revenue that's coming in should be big enough to pay everyone like a living wage. So
Yeah.
they're doing just as good as anybody else, like in the capitalist system, but just upper management and owners, you know,
Well, the
going
owners
back
are the
to the
workers.
way it was, where, you know, they were making 10 times more than the average worker.
Yeah, and
or
in a
whatever.
worker cooperative, usually the wage discrepancy, the wage ratio between the highest paid and the lowest paid worker in any given is much lower than what you see in the traditional business. You know, now what, like, it's, you know, if you take top, you know, they did some study, Market Watch, I think, released some study recently. It was like, I think Fortune 500 companies or the top 100 of the Fortune 500, the wage discrepancy was 1 to 247 or something like that. You know, it's very, very large.
Right,
You know, in most worker co-ops, it's much less than that.
So then it's not, is it more like a partnership or sole proprietor?
No,
Yeah, it's co-ownership. So you have, everyone has an equal investment. Even if someone did invest more money, that doesn't give them a bigger vote. It's one person, one vote. And, you know, and the democratic structure changes as it grows, you know, because you have to have a structure where all the workers get a vote, but they might be voting on, you know, who's going to represent them instead of every single detail of the business.
I think that's the key. One, you know, whatever you're investing, you still only get one vote versus a corporation. You get a vote for every share of stock that you own.
Yeah,
And that's what gives you the leverage to get what you want.
right. And in cooperatives, they call it a surplus rather than a profit. And so at the end of the year, you're deciding with that surplus if, you know, you get a patronage back per worker depending on how much you work. I mean, if you put in more hours, you might be owed more of that money. Or you decide, okay, we're all going to get this much, but we're going to put 50% of this back into the business. Or we're doing so well, we know that our friends down the street are trying to open this other cooperative, so we're going to loan them part of our surplus so they can get a startup. That's what Mandy is doing.
It's a different way of distributing the profits.
It's different language.
Yeah.
You know, you don't use the word employees. There are no employees. And you have to, legally, you have to be very careful about that with the new co-op laws. I'm not an expert in the cooperative laws, but California did pass a new amendment or change the cooperative law that exists to incorporate worker cooperatives. So worker cooperatives, at least 50% of the people working there have to be owners by this law. So you can have other workers, like there might be seasonal work, you bring in other people.
Employees or whatever.
Yeah, and they get a fair wage and that, but they might not necessarily become owners.
Bob, you had a question?
I just had a question. My first question was really the one that the initial one that you posed, which is about funding. But it just seems to me that this is such a wonderful potential solution, given the magnitude of the problem surrounding incarceration, the paucity of new ideas coming forward to deal with it, and the abysmal record we have in terms of recidivism, that this idea would be broadly embraced. Mm-hmm. and there would be money coming from a lot of different sources. That's really, I was really interested in who might be the source of getting these enterprises off the ground. And I was thinking more along the lines of even public money,
Right.
grant money, state, federal, local grant money, that might be instrumental in getting these off the ground. I mean, in California or locally in LA, what might some of those be?
There's some contracts coming down through the county and the city, and people have sent them me, oh, you should apply for this and apply for that. And I hope to be in the position to do that soon, but right now Collective REMAKE isn't its own entity yet. We're working under the fiscal agency of the Fair Chance Project. So I don't really qualify for that, but because we're doing education around business startup, potentially. So there are some dollars coming down that I will be looking at. And there's money now in the arts programming in the state and the county for reentry organizations that are like Los Angeles Poverty Department just got a grant from the state because they're going to be doing arts programming with people at the Weingartz reentry facility. So there's that kind of money also. It's not enough, but it's educating people and making people aware of the broader issues, and the people who are incarcerated are human beings. You know, and that's a big hurdle to jump over.
We're beyond just throwing out the idea and getting exposure. Where do you feel the most important place will be for you to get traction for this really to take off?
Well, I got my first grant from the Black Equity Initiative, and it's a project that's created by this group of entrepreneurs or philanthropists called the JIB Fund, and I'm hoping I'll be able to use that as leverage. Like, you know, I have a proof of concept now to go to, you know, the California Endowment or the Wellness Foundation, or I think there is money out for this, for new innovative ideas like this, so it's to be discovered. So if you hear of anything, please throw it our way.
There's a question over here.
Just a comment about what you said about the funding. In France, I don't know about here, but in France there is a financial cooperative, so it's like a bank, but it's a cooperative bank, and they have they're funding lots of projects with that, and so when you're a member of that bank, you can decide what kind of project you will fund. Right.
So that's like what shared cooperative is, shared capital is in Minnesota. But yes, we need to create the local banks too. So Nikki O'Coop, she's very interested in that too. From the tire recycling is building up a black-owned bank in South LA for a cooperative.
There is something that we've recently discovered exists called the National Cooperative Bank, which is a bank that's chartered by the U.S. Congress with the mission of loaning exclusively to cooperative businesses. And it has different kinds of offices across the country. I think it's like 15 offices in the biggest cities. And it has a nonprofit arm, which kind of, you know, does the, I don't know exactly what it is. I haven't really looked at it, but anyway, if anyone wants to look into it, for the folks watching at home, National Cooperative Bank would be a good like research topic.
Is that bank also cooperative?
Yes, it's run cooperatively. Yeah.
I just wondered, there was one particular success story about the worm farm. I just wondered if you could just like tell us, as more anecdote of what happened over the summer with that guy who did the program.
Okay, so, of the 11 people that completed the workshops, there's a few businesses that are still going to be developed, and Thomas Porter is going to start a worm farm. So he fleshed out the finances, and we figured out that it's actually a viable business, that there's very few places over in the harbor that sell worms for fishermen, and they bring them in from outside the region, and you can sell worms for so and so much per pound. And you can also use worms to create compost, and people buy compost. So he's networking out to the 5 Points Youth Foundation, who we've developed a great relationship with through the workshops, and they're going to give him space to buy his little worm houses. So that's probably the one that's really going to
He got he got a loan as well just a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure where that's going to go because he needs a co-signer. That's a thing. There's a Jewish loan fund that will give out money, not just for cooperatives, but they'll give out money, like if you have a crisis, and you pay back at, I think it's no interest. So he applied and got a loan approved for his business to start up the worm farm. So that's really exciting. So there's small things like that, but there's, Concerned Capital is another funding entity, and I'm sure there's different funding entities in different areas around the country.
Do you plan to work as a collective remake already from within the prison and follow people as they go out of prison, or just after?
Well, I'm focusing on starting with people that are already out in re-entry, but we have Fair Chance Project has a relationship with women inside CIW out in Chino. It's the women's prison out in east of Los Angeles, about an hour. And because all prisoners are already making lots of art inside prisons. They defunded all the art programs over the last 30 years, but people's creativity still is at work. So they've got a big box of stuff for us to pick up, but we're going to integrate these women into a cooperative. But I want them to be part of designing the bylaws and the structure of the cooperative. So I am right now figuring out how to share that information out and send them the business design model canvas that they can use, and then set up a meeting and get permission from the, it's all pretty tricky. Of what you can do. There can't be any cash exchange. So how are we gonna, that's where I want to use time banking. I want the women to calculate their time into their products so that we can put it in the books on the outside. So even if, whether they get out or they're never going to get out, that could be used to send them more materials back in, or to support a family member on the outside, or some legal help if they need legal help, that kind of thing. I don't have any illusion that we'll be able to do what they do in Ethiopia in the state of California, where women can go and come back and actually handle money and all that. They take all your money right now. If you send a gift into a loved one inside the state prison system, they automatically take out a percentage of that now. People are expected to pay for their own, a lot of their own housing expenses. In some counties, they're actually trying to charge families $100 and some a night for their time in the county jail, which is just, I'm not sure if they were able to implement that, but they were doing that out in Riverside, proposing that out in Riverside. So can you imagine that debt being compounded in a family? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people, if they have been involved in a violent crime, and have to put money into a victims fund, so they take that out of your money.
The one cooperative we were talking about before in Italy, I was briefly looking because there are a lot of information in Italian, and it's actually, I don't know the difference. It's I mean, I can imagine probably it's a social cooperative. But what they do, they use recycled materials so that the raw material doesn't cost anything. And then they work, the women in prison work 6 hours per day, and they get a salary with all the benefit included of 750 euros for 6 hours a day. That in Italy is very per month, which is a very fair salary that you would get normally if you work 6 hours per day, and they can use those money for family loans or whatever. So and it's called the Made in Capture, which is made in prison. So if you want more information, because most of it is in Italian, I can.
Yes, I do. And those social enterprises have partly inspired this model too, because then I think on the outside, then they also are doing reentry services and supporting these people as a whole unit, as a, taking care of all the needs. That's one thing.
Yeah, because they're learning to do. It's also a lot focused on reentry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Yes, I want that info for sure. Yeah, because right now when people come home to Los Angeles County, there is no cooperation among the county entities and the state and the city entities. So, people are never treated as their whole being. They might go to a drug rehab somewhere, even if you don't need a drug rehab, and you might have to go for job training over here, and you have to, you've been in prison for 20 years and you're having to take buses here and there, and there's just no, people are just traumatized. And and there's different services depending on your conviction. So rather than treating the person, they're treating the crime, and it just makes no sense. So those social enterprise models are important.
I have another question, but that's very general on prison now, because I don't know anything about it here especially. Do they have like mental services inside the prisons or anything like that for assisting people?
They have solitary confinement. I mean, that's where that plot of Coleman case came from, because of the lack of good mental health services. And if it's a huge problem, especially in the county, because if you were on certain meds before you went in, you don't get your meds. And people have people have been killed and been inside the county jail because people are all of a sudden off their med and having psychotic episodes. And when they put everybody on the same kind of medication, you're not necessarily going to get what your doctor prescribed. You can have cancer and go to the state prison system and get taken off your treatment that you were on. It's so yeah, no, mental illness is not dealt with very well. LA County made a plan to divert 1,000 people diagnosed with mental illness from the county jail, and that was over 2 years ago that the DA, Lacey, agreed to do that. And as far as I know, the services and the infrastructure to do that hasn't been invested in.
So if you commit a crime because of your mental illness, do you still go to jail here?
Yeah. They shut down all the facilities back in Reagan. It was Reagan that shut them all down. So that's not a coincidence either. At the same time, all this stuff started happening in the 80s, and the mental health facilities across the state were shut down. And the only other place to go then is to jail and prison, or you're on the street.
They're basically like half psychiatric hospitals, jails. Half.
Without
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you shouldn't even go to a, you should get treatment rather than put it in any type of institution.
Yeah, the conversations like at the Board of Supervisors when you're talking about this population, it's just like, it's just an accepted fact that there's this growing population with people with mental illness. They never address why, ever, you know? When you've totally taken all the good food, all the good education, all the jobs out of certain communities and there's nothing there, and families are totally alienated and have no resources, what do you expect? You know, it's clear that this is what it is, an alienation, you know? So yeah, the symptoms aren't being addressed, or the symptoms are being addressed, the causes are not. And LA County is, I mean, the worst, really, the worst. So I'd love to do the research on who's punny, what money in whose pocket.
All right, Mary.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.